a little bit inspired by my friend, the Grandmaster Ben Feingold, I've decided that the topic for today will be Ruy Lopez, Spanish openings Middlegames. And the idea was that he showed me some games by his new idol. He has a new idol. He used to be a very big fan of MVL, as everybody knows. And now he has a new idol, and that idol is slightly younger than him. And when I say slightly, I mean 30-some years slightly, yes, younger. And we are talking about Ilya Makoveev, Russian player. I have to say that I saw him at the World Youth last year, where he completely demolished every American player that he played. No matter what we tried, it was very difficult because he plays many different openings and different styles. He's already very versatile. So we will use this game A to make the introduction to Ben's hero and also talk a little bit about Ruy Lopez. You will see some sort of a contrastual game because after that I'm going to show you a game between two top-of-the-line grandmasters. And you will see that again, even when one side plays perfectly and the other side plays not so perfectly, it's kind of the same impression, both if you see not so strong players and very strong players. So he's playing someone who's probably around 1700, I'm guessing, in the European Championship that's going on right now. He is 8 out of 8, and I think he already won the tournament. He cannot be caught. So tomorrow is for the, just for the, how do you say, for the record. So we have Ruy Lopez with A6, and again, a main variation, D3. Okay, like I said, the kid can play anything. He can play normally with like Rook E1, B5, castles, and all this thing. But maybe he wants to already announce that to his opponent that he's not going to play into the martial attack, and he plays D3, B5. Yeah, of course, in those positions, there's also psychological decision because in kids' tournaments, I see that many times kids just don't pay attention to the nuances of the opening. They learn a certain line, and any deviation is just ignored. For example, here, if you notice, the pawn on D3 is now defending the pawn on E4. So if you just go castles, which seems like a normal move, I'm just going to take the knight and take the pawn on E5, you're going to have to work very hard to make any compensation for this pawn, probably without success. So he chases the bishop, and then D6. Okay, a normal move. A4, again in the spirit of the martial, but kind of different. Normally black castles, and the pawn is on D2, rook on E1, and then A4. But okay, those ideas are all kind of similar. So bishop G4, not my favorite move in the position by far. In positions like this, black has to choose between either putting the bishop on B7 and trying to be on the long diagonal, or if he doesn't care for that, he has to play either B4 or rook to B8. But the idea of bishop G4 when there's a pawn on D3, it's almost always a suspicious idea. Almost always. The point is that it's very easy to prevent knight D4, which is threatened, or bishop takes F3 and knight D4. And after that, the bishop is just being chased, and he has several choices, all of which are not very appetizing. One of them is to go to H5 and G6 and be buried forever. The other one is to take the knight, give white 2 bishops with a very easy game. And the third one is to just retreat back, and then white is very happy because many times he plays H3 on his own account without chasing anything. So in an event, here, Makoveev will not allow knight D4, obviously. Castles, H3, immediately putting the question to the bishop, step 1, and he decided to go to D7. Well, I'm sure that many players just instinctively, like I didn't check this move with this game with the computer, it just was a very nice game to show anyways. But I'm positive that this is not one of the first choices. That's not a good move. I really understand the reluctance to play something like bishop H5, because white is going to play the same plan with rook E1, knight D2, knight F1, knight G3, hitting the bishop, and I will take it if you don't move it. And then if you go something like bishop G6, I'm going to play stuff like knight H4, queen F3, and the bishop, either I'm going to take it or just put something on F5, make you take it anyways, and all this trip with the bishop is going to be futile. At best, you'll get a knight for it. Of course, you can play bishop takes F3, queen takes F3, but then when you look at the bishop on the long diagonal, the A2, G8 diagonal, it's very, very discouraging. That bishop is going to be without match. Even if later I'll have to move it to C2 and play D4, that bishop is always going to be a problem child without a countering bishop. So bishop D7, not good. Maybe bishop E6. That would have been what I would have played. For sure, I would have played bishop e6 here. So bishop d7, bishop c2. Okay, I'm not saying that this is the best move in the world. I think that this is a little bit of crying before you hurt, but again, I'm not showing you a perfect game. I'm showing you a game with all kinds of ideas in the Ruy. One idea that is, of course, the most normal is to play rook e1, knight d2, knight f1, knight g3. It's very similar, yeah. But bishop c2 is just not absolutely necessary right now. There's some advantages in leaving the bishop in this long diagonal, especially when the rook can move to e8. There could be some trouble on f7, sometimes. Okay, I'm not saying necessarily in this very position, but sometimes. For one thing, white can sometimes play knight g5. The rook will have to return, and then you can play f4. They're aligned like this, and sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. But again, if we had many hours, it'll be easier to explain. That's not really a topic now. So bishop c2, rook e8, okay, knight bd2, knight a5, definitely a bad choice. In a position like this, knight goes to a5. If you chase a bishop that is already on b3, and when the bishop retreats, you get to play the move c5. Then it's very harmonious. Then the knight finds itself landing back on c6 with pressure against d4 and b4. That makes a lot of sense. In this position, as you will notice, there is no bishop on b3, and therefore the move knight a5 serves no purpose, even though it's not ideal and you're really dying to move the c-pawn. That's, by the way, another reason why the bishop on d7 is really lame. Otherwise, maybe you can play something along the lines of, not immediately because of the conflict on the a and b pawns, but some idea where the knight will go to b8, just like the Breyer variations, and maybe the knight can land on d7, more flexible. So here he doesn't have it, so probably a normal move would be bishop f8, to play something like g6, bishop g7, try to somehow work with the pieces that he can. You will see how in this game somehow you get tied in knots on the queen side in a real funny way. So knight a5, of course, Makoveev says, all right, and now what? You went with the knight, and where are you going to go? You have to go backwards. And again, sometimes a psychological decision, you have to say to yourself, okay, I made a mistake. I planned to do something, didn't see this move, didn't appreciate it. Let's make damage control, and the knight has to go back to c6. In our game, he plays knight b7, and of course, this is maybe just not to return to c6, right? Just to say, okay, not to admit the mistake, but that just compounds the problem. The knight on b7 is going to have a very, very long vacation on b7. So, d4, very direct and very accurate. Why not? Everything is protected, so why not advance the center? Bishop f8, okay. One of many possibilities. You can play other moves. You can take on d4 first and play bishop f8. But it's very understandable that black doesn't really want to make for a fluid center. When I say fluid, it means he can move, that the center can move forward. He prefers a blocked center. Bishop f8, bishop b2, totally fine. Pawn to c6, again anchoring the pawn on b5. Not the most aggressive plan, but I can't really blame black because he cannot do anything really productive. And now he takes, and c4. The funny thing is that if you look at the game on the computer that shows the game, on some of the sites that show the game, I copied it from one of those sites, he kind of frowns on this move. But of course the computer doesn't have time to churn. In my opinion, this move is a very good move. I don't believe that this is a bad move. I mean, I know it's a good move because immediately creates threats and there's just no reason. If bishop takes b4, for example, then knight takes e5, and again, white just looks super in that position. That's exactly the kind of structure that he wants. So again, remember that the black player is not super strong, and it's easy for him to make mistakes. He goes bishop d6, of course, not a good decision. He's really worried about trading or losing the pawn on e5, but you see that defending it now is going to be a big headache. Just worsen your position, deprives you out of space, and no counterplay, the worst part ever. So here, of course, c5, advancing the pawn, bishop c7, bishop to b3. I mean, again, not the only move in the position, but very easy to understand. White is simply controlling more and more space. It's really a funner game for white. It's nice to see how the bishop on b2 knew that he'll have his day in the sun after a capture and advance of the c-pawn. Bishop b3, h6, okay, very good. Nobody can really argue with this move because the move knight g5 is always on the agenda. So h6, by far a good choice. And queen c2. Notice that white makes moves here that are, maybe we wouldn't have figured out all of them, but many of them you can say, okay, they really make sense. They're not very difficult, not much fireworks. He really gains space, develops his pieces. All the miners are doing something. I can't really maximize the potential of my miners. I know that knight d2 has yet to have his good say, but watch what happens in this game. The knight will definitely have a good say. So for now, let me put the queen somewhere and connect the rooks. Queen e2 is a good alternative, but queen c2, nothing to complain about. So queen here, queen e7, doing the same. And now pawn takes. Yeah, at some point you have to do it. I was really wondering, but I haven't tested it yet, but it's really interesting to see what would have happened if he would have played in the spirit of some of Fischer's games in the Ruy Lopez, where he plays one rook up, then bring the other rook over, and at the right time, every time the pawn is threatening to take on b5. Here, the good news is that eventually he is going to relinquish the a file anyways, as you will see. So not a huge difference. So takes. Of course, c takes is completely out because c6 is just winning. So takes. Rook a8, rook a8. Queen to c3. Piling up again against the pawn on e5. Again, that was a chronic problem. Probably by now, if black had objectively thought about it, he already regretted, man, I should have taken the pawn on b4, given the pawn on e5, maybe it would have been a little worse. But what happens here is just not good. Notice the dominance of knight b7 here, yeah? Really, it's threatening to go maybe to c9 or... So he had to return the rook and defend the pawn. And of course, now we are ready to just conquer the file. When you think that the player with the white pieces is 9 years old, I think that there's definitely something to be impressed by. Everything is played by the plan. I always tell my students I'm going to show this game more and more, because I always have my problem with my students that at some point you just feel that they're playing from move to move. It's like, oh, that move looks really good, I'll play it. Then the next move looks really good, and then the opponent plays something they haven't thought about, so they're thinking again, getting into time trouble. Here you see the simplicity. It's like a takes b, took on a8, looks like he's relinquishing the file. Next move he plays queen c3, attacking the pawn on e5. Black has to defend it, and then the rook comes and conquers the file. Rook, really simple chess, really logical chess. I like to play like this. So, bishop c8, again, in anticipation of rook a7. It's not like our knight is going to go far, right? Knight d8, rook a7 is also not exactly a pleasure. So here, rook a8. If the bishop moves, then rook a7. Knight d7. Okay, this is definitely not a solution, but kill me if I know what to do here, because black is really hurting. Maybe something like queen d7. This is my, if I was here, I would have played queen d7 with some idea of like knight d8, knight e6, maybe, I don't know, at some point. But again, every move you have to calculate what happened about this pawn. Somehow you have to really untangle, but I don't know how. Again, the game illustrates how white completely outplays black with very simple plans in the Ruy. Everything here is just well known. So knight d7, knight f1. Of course, now that the rook has left the e file, the f file, the f1 square, my knight is ready to come into the game via either e3 or g3, depending on the circumstances. Goes here. Queen f6. Hallelujah. Black has a cheapo in the position. He's threatening bishop takes h3. How beautiful. So the one threat that he has in the game. So Makoveev again plays a move that seems reasonable. I don't know if he could have done something else, but I think this is a decent move. Knight here. And I don't think you can take, well, I mean, okay, I'm talking about the next move, obviously, that he was threatening to take on h3. So knight b8. Now he's threatening to take on h3, one threat that he has in the position. And Makoveev, of course, takes care of that. I was wondering if he can do something else here, because I was looking a little deeply here, but couldn't really come up with something else. It looks like in some lines, maybe you want to give up this pawn, and because you can get so much play. I mean, there's all the bishops and the knights. It just looks really delicious here. But okay, what he did was also good. Knight h2. Yes?
Why was black threatening to take on h3?
Say again?
Why was black threatening to take on h3?
No, I mean, I want to move my queen away because the queen is not going anywhere. But I have to worry about bishop h3 and the knight is hanging. So I need to, the queen can't stay on c3 forever. I have to use my queen to win. So So knight h2, queen g5, very nice. Okay, a change of plans. Bishop c1. Okay, in this position, of course, queen c1 is also a possibility. Would have been interesting, but all right. Bishop c1, queen e7, knight g4. And I'm amazed that he did not take this knight. He played here. That's definitely a bad move, for sure. I don't know what else to suggest other than taking the knight. You have to take the knight here. Normally, in this position, is the idea of taking the knight, as you will see in the coming game that I will show you, after pawn takes, there's some hope to use the h-file for your pieces. And again, this has to be very well timed, as I will show you. But in this position, you don't have that, obviously. So taking the knight would have been, I know that this is two bishops, and again, like I said before, this guy will have no match, but this knight is becoming a real pain. So, king h7, queen f3, still taking the knight, although now I think it's even worse. Rook f8, well, you got to do something about pawn f7. So rook f8, knight f5. Makoveev is just exercising all the plans that we want to do in the Ruy Lopez. Ideally, in this position, you want to have the knights like this. Sometimes the knight is on h4 also, and then you play knight f5. That's also good. You want the bishop on this diagonal. You want the bishop to be available, especially in both diagonals, but especially this one. Notice h6. h6 is a chronic problem. And in this game, it came to fruition in a very impressive way. And as a bonus to all of this, we have a rook here that's just waiting to take some pieces that are here. Don't you like these two knights and two bishops? This is really a unique formation. Something that I do not recommend, by the way. So, knight f5, takes. And again, I like Makoveev's thinking, because my natural response would have been to simply take with the queen. And in the case of g6, just go back with the queen to f3. And f6 is mine, and h6 is under attack. And I'm positive that the computer is going to give thumbs up, because it just looks great. But he wants to take with the pawn. He's dying to play the move f6. Now f6 is on the agenda. So black must play, I think this is the only move. I don't see what else to do. And white played back queen to c3. Again, very hungrily eyeing the move f6. If I get to play the move f6, it's going to be super. So black does it himself. And now white plays rook a7. Now there's no bishop on c8. Let's start tickling on the second rank. And really bad problem. He played knight d8. Okay. What else to suggest? Maybe bishop d8? Who wants to play that move exactly? I don't know. After bishop d8, knight b7 really has no moves. And knight b8 has no moves because you're going to lose knight b7. And the bishop on d8 has no moves. And the queen has to stay in touch with the bishop. So with one little move, you're going to paralyze four pieces. That's an achievement. So however, this didn't work either because he just played bishop f4. And of course now black has really one move, but it's not enough. He tried bishop e5, where he's attacking the queen and his opponent attacking the queen. So, of course, rook takes, bishop takes c3. Now, all of you, when you're looking at this position, both in the classroom and at home, if I had to guess white's next move, I would say, okay, bishop takes b8. Right? That looks like a really, yes? That's what he did. I can't argue with that either, but I mean, he doesn't even bother to take a knight, which seems like, I don't know, I would have done it, and I would have expected my opponent to resign, but of course, who can argue with this move? Also very, very strong. And yeah, resignation would have been a pretty good idea, because you can't take anything and you're about to lose all that you own. He tried the last trick, and after this he took. And of course, Makoveev never will miss mate in 3. Check, check, resigns. After king g8, knight h6, checkmate. So, very, very nice. A very impressive game by someone who's 9 years old. And again, demonstrating some of the ideas in the Ruy Lopez. Now we're going to see another game, like I promised, between two different players. And that game was also played very recently. And this is the game that eventually decided the match between Giri and Svidler in the World Cup that's going on right now. As you know, black won. Yes. I should mention for the crowd at home, I should mention that there was a pool running here, and only 2 players reached the end, and it all depended on the result of Svidler Giri. Ben Feingold And August, yeah, what can you do? And if Giri would have won, then August would have won. However, Svidler won with black, then he drew comfortably with white, and Ben Feingold is doing the hula, which is in itself a nice sight. So let's take a look at this game. Again, Ruy Lopez, and any commentary that's here is based on the analysis in chessbase.com, which was very good analysis, so why change? So again, we have a Ruy Lopez, and yeah, b5 was played by Svidler before, I think against Karyakin, if I remember correctly. Bishop e7, rook e1, the normal moves, everything is normal. b5, again, not to lose the e-pawn. Bishop d3, and castles, which normally, especially by someone like Svidler, but just generally, is an invitation to play the martial gambit, the martial attack. And we know that nowadays the most popular moves are d3 and a4. Definitely, most people don't like to see the martial. But Giri, I guess, was very well prepared. He knew he was playing, yes?
H3 also.
Yeah, also a move, yeah. But mostly you see d3 and a4. Those are by far the two most popular, statistically the most popular. So Giri is saying, okay, you want to play the martial, play the martial. And Svidler says, no. And the question is, it's really curious to ask, I didn't see the interviews after the game, I wonder if it was even anybody asked him. And it's obvious that Giri is inviting the martial, and Svidler, even though he played it a bunch of time before and very successfully, he declines it, he plays d6. So I'm wondering if he kind of smelled the rat and thought, well, if my opponent has prepared something against it, I don't want to test it today. You know, in a 2-game match, if you lose 1 game, it's just like all over. And he plays d6. The good news about this is that Svidler, in my opinion, if not, he is one of the, if not the #1 Ruy Lopez expert in the world right now. Played every variation of it with black very successfully, really understands the ideas to amazing depth. So for him to change could be even inspiration of the moment, because he can afford to do that. But I don't know if that was true, or I'm just guessing. So pawn h3, of course, whites want to play d4 without allowing the bishop to go to g4. Bishop to b7. And the commentator said that here Svidler thought for 3 minutes. Well, obviously, because there's like many other moves. You can play knight a5, and you can play knight b8 in the Breyer system, and he plays here. Okay. So pawn d4, rook e8. Again, you notice that the ideas have some differences, but still much of it is the same. White is building a space advantage, and he wants to kind of, I'm not saying necessarily close, but have his say in the center, and then try to maneuver all his pieces to the queen side, to the king side, and create some initiative. So, yeah, of course, here it's well known that white can always test black's aggression by playing here, here, and then here. Many grandmasters of games ended in a draw like this. When you want to make a quick draw, that's a really known system to do it. Something tells me that Svidler would have been okay with it, but to blame Giri for not going into it is just crazy, because, of course, with white in a theoretical position, you want to push. You're going to play black next game. So, okay. So rook e8, he played knight bd2, and the normal move is bishop f8, being very flexible about the center, but he decided to take, and play knight d7. Here he has completely different ideas for the bishop. Rather than playing it to bishop f8 and then g6, bishop g7, like we're automatically used to, he wants to put the bishop on f6 and create direct pressure at the center. I should mention parenthetically that this is the kind of game, remember again, you have to remember the situation and remember the opposition. When you play someone like Giri, who is just about 2,800, and even though you are a very strong player by yourself, former Russian champion several times, you are not sad if you get a draw, especially in a mini match. So Svidler is not trying to win by force or to try to make some crazy continuation. He just want to have a stable position, equalize, and prove that he is not going to lose. So, knight f1, knight a5, okay? It goes without saying that in this position, white practically never, in any variation of the Ruy Lopez, really wants to allow knight takes bishop. So he moves it. And of course, bishop f6, like promised, the bishop goes on this diagonal. Okay. So black has a very interesting setup with 2 crisscross bishops on the a1 ha diagonal and the a8 h1 diagonals. And white, of course, has 2 very proud pawns in the center. And remember, we said fluid center always threatens to advance. So rook b1. The idea of rook b1 is double-edged. One, I want to free this bishop without having any c5s and accidents on the diagonal. And also, in the case that black has any ideas of playing knight c4, I'm going to play b3. Or if you play other moves also, you have to be very concerned about b3. So rook b1, okay. It's an okay move. Now, black has to be a bit careful. Because if I get to play b3 at some moment, like maybe right now, with the diagonal, I don't have to worry about anything, with the rook on the bishop, the same diagonal, then maybe the knight on a5 is going to look really funny. You'd have to find some way to get it back. So Svidler does something else. He plays c5 immediately, challenging the center. And it's well known that many times in this kind of a position, black is not afraid to take, even though his d-pawn looks really strange and isolated and backwards. Many times at the right time, he can just advance forward. So Giri closed the position. They're mentioning a variation where white tried to play very aggressively in some game. I forget who the opponents were. But after pawn takes, knight g3, rook c8, black's initiative on the queen side is no less fast than black. Did I say white? Black's on the queen side than white's on the king side. And the assessment was that black was better in this position. So he closed the position. Again, very, very well known. And again, you have to have a very steady hand when you play this variation with black, because offhand, optically, when you're looking at it, you think, well, my bishop on b7 is a real ugly piece. And it is. But the good news is that in a closed position, and notice that when the pawn moves to d5, it's going to be awfully hard for white to play e5, there's going to be lots of time for maneuvering. So at some point, he's anticipating a recycling of this bishop to this diagonal one more time. Let's see how it's done. Knight c4, pawn b3, knight e5. And here Giri makes several the first of several brave decisions. And brave, maybe I'm exaggerating, but like proper decisions, I should say. Because, of course, he can take on e5, and then he would have no problems. I mean, he would never have lost the game if he played knight e5. I mean, just equal. But he is correctly assessing that he doesn't want to improve the position of the black game, and he's going to try to prove that he can use his pieces better. For now, the game is very, very equal, maybe slightly tiny better for white. Knight g6. Again, notice that everything falls into place. One piece goes one place, the other one goes to the other. And if you look at the position, notice that just 2 minutes ago, the knight was on a5 with some real embarrassing option of being here forever. For example, if the pawn would have been on g6, let's say, instead of immediately playing c5, then this would be not good. The knight would be on a5 forever. On c5, d5, there'll be a knight here standing, wondering, how am I ever coming to the civilization? It's even worse than the game we saw before, because he can't even go back via b7. But when you play like this, then in 2 seconds, the knight came all the way to the other side of the board, where he has a very stable situation. He's very happy on g6, no question here. So, knight g3, again, the standard move. Bishop c8. As promised, the bishop is recycled back to the c8 square. And many times, if the knight goes to f5, it has serious intention of capturing it. So again, I really, really like the harmony in Svidler's position. Okay, now they're analyzing a variation, because here he played rook f1. And the reason behind rook f1 is A, to put the rook behind the f1, but most importantly, not to allow a tempo with bishop c3. He wants to play knight g4, eyeing the bishop very hungrily. If I get to take this bishop and put a bishop on b2, can you imagine what's going to happen? White is going to have a bishop that's just terrorizing the position forever. So bishop c3 tempo, rook moves, knight e5, and everything falls into place. When the knight goes to e3, knight to f4, knight to f5, knight g6. Once again, notice how it's like some game of dancing, almost like musical chairs, when the knights keep changing places and everything falls into place. He managed to stop f4. He has a beautiful knight stuck on f4, and the bishop is on a real proud diagonal. The best white can ever do is hope to maybe trade bishops somehow, and that is just it. So in lieu of this, he plays rook f1. Now he is threatening to play knight g4, obviously. This is really becoming a threat. So Svidler plays knight b6. Again, this time notice that after knight e5, f4 simply sends it back, and then this is exactly what white dreams to have. He managed to put his knights, now the knights are coming to h5 and f5. I can now probably take the bishop. Unless you go to e7, then I play my knight to f5, and my pieces are just swarming forward, and e5 will always be a move, not pleasant. So Svidler understands and plays knight to b6. Very, very clever. I mean, this is really a high level game that I explained how everything has to fall into place correctly. Okay, knight g4. Again, eyeing the bishop, and the bishop doesn't really want to go back, so the bishop takes it. Again, we have to understand, like I explained in the previous game, when there's a knight on g4 and a bishop on c8, almost exclusively here you want to take, unless there's a reason not to, because this bishop doesn't have many good squares. In this whole diagonal, I mean, this diagonal is just hopeless, and on this diagonal, all you have is d7, which is not improving much on c8. So he took it, and he took with the pawn. Again, like we saw in the previous game, the idea is to try to play something on the h-file. If you take with the queen, the analyst gave just here, here, and here. Very, very solid. f4, knight d7, and the rook is opposite the queen. Already I'll be threatening knight takes d5 sometimes. Black is doing good. So, pawn takes, h6. Yeah, again, some of the things that black has to worry about is that at the right time, if the queen moves away, I can play g5, f4, the pawns will advance, the knight will advance. That will be superbly dangerous. And also, an escape for the king never heard. So he plays h6, knight f5, very thematic. Everything is going just well. Can't complain about that. And now Svidler played knight e7, once again inviting a trade of the annoying knight on f5. And this is the second so-called brave decision by Giri, because again, he could have just let the knights be traded, and I don't think that this is the end of the world. He would have been quite all right. But he just retreats with the knight. He wants to keep his pieces. He is still trying to prove that maybe he can have something in this game. Maybe he can still get somewhere. I think he deserves a lot of appreciation for that. Now it's Svidler's turn, because again, white right now is very consolidated. He's not threatening anything immediate, but has a little more space. And he played the move b4. Yeah, he could have also played the move c4, but then of course after the forced trade and trade f4, it looks optically that like white has at least a slight advantage. More space and better pawn structure, especially because the c pawn and the a pawn are looking a bit funny. In the game, he decided to facilitate the advance of the a pawn. So first of all, he fixes the pawns, and now he wants to go a5, a4, take here, and try to use the a file for the rook. And this demands a lot of accuracy from white, and you'll see that when he didn't provide it, black immediately took over. But we'll talk about it in a second. So g3, again, some of you might wonder what's going on. Everything seemed to have shifted to the queen side, and then all of a sudden, white plays this funny move g3. Well, he wants to do something on the h-file with his rook. The whole point of moving the h-pawn from h2 to g4, from h3 to g4, is to open the h-file for his pieces. But again, in this kind of a structure, it looks to me like black is doing so well that the attack is bound to fail. And I think that, but g3 is not a mistake for sure. So g3, a5, king g2, a4. Okay. This was, I moved pretty fast because this looks like a forced sequence. And now white played the move pawn takes a4. And I have to tell you, when I saw this move, immediately, like in an instant-second, I thought to myself, this has to be a bad move. And I see that the computer and the commentators are in complete agreement. Why? Why do you do that? Really, really strange. It's not like this is the end of the world, because you see that later on he has another chance to kind of bail properly. But it was so unnecessary. Really not necessary. For example, here is a line that the annotators gave that I have no complaint about. Bishop to d3, takes, rook a2, rook e1, and the idea is now to bring the rook to e2, to challenge the rook on e1, because this rook was not doing anything. And I don't think that white is in any trouble. Again, notice that this knight is very much staying, otherwise my knight will go to c4. At any time I can always trade it. And my position is really solid with white. I don't think that he would ever lose. And if anybody has an advantage, maybe white is a tiny bit, but okay, black is definitely play well to be all right.
So,
but no?
Aviv,
Yes, sir.
we would play rook e1 and rook e2 to cancel that rook on a2, but what if we just got onto our idea of rook h1, all that, we have nothing there?
No.
Play is so dangerous?
Nope. There's just nothing happening.
Oh, okay.
There's just you'll see that there's just no way to do it. You'll see what he did in the game. He went really crazy in the game. He even sacked a piece, but you will see that it just led nowhere. So this is the problem. He went, I think that he just couldn't accept the fact that he's going to make a draw, that his opponent makes such a comfortable draw, but in retrospect, he really regretted it, really paid for it. And the first decision is indeed to take on a4. Wow, really, really a bad decision. So, okay, black plays queen d7. Now he wants his pawn back. And notice how critical this becomes. I want to take here and I want to play here with my knight. That will just be an easy win of material. So now white had one more chance. He played, no, sorry, first queen d3. That's obvious. That was the point of the thing. And now, funnily enough, the computer says you can even take on a4. Take it. So after taking on e4, e5, bishop takes, queen h7 check, king 8 f8. And like the commentator says, and I'm standing strongly behind every word, no human would have done it. At least no human that I know. Yeah, even the craziest of tacticians, especially them maybe because they don't like to suffer, would not allow it. So, I mean, look at this optically. Here, 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 here. And, okay, they say black is okay. And I have to tell you, maybe a computer says black is okay, but for a human, I would have been afraid out of my wits to play like that. I think that this is just like, who wants to play this kind of chess? Every move you have to measure, you can't get rid of my queen. Very, very dangerous. So, though sometimes computers and humans differ. In any event, he played knight g6. Again, I think that this is a good enough move. I don't think this really spoils anything. The only thing is that now it gives white a chance to really bail. And when you look at the position, when I looked at it, I thought that there was really only one move in the position. And I'm dying. I wish that the Sinquefield Cup would happen now and Giri would be here. I would ask him, dude, why didn't you play a3 here? Because the move a3, it seems like this is really a chronic weakness on a2. Really terrible. And in the game, he just lost it. He lost the pawn. The whole game just went bluey. Now, why not play a3? Notice that after a3, you cannot take on a3 because of rook takes b6. So you'd have to take on here, and I have to take on b3. I mean, this would have been at least some sort of a game. So for example, look at the line that they're suggesting, which I think is also pretty sound. Here, takes, knight e5. Perfect timing, because normally before, if knight e5 would have come immediately, then the queen might have gone to e2 and protected the pawn and everything is cool. But now queen e2, knight c3 is just too expensive. So you have to go to d2, and then he just takes on g4. Okay, the position is a bit messy. Again, black cannot possibly be worse. But thank goodness white doesn't have any pawns to lose on the queen side. He is not going after some shadow attack that never will succeed. He just manages to get a draw. And then the next game, who knows, you could have gone to playoffs or something. So, no, we don't have that. He played knight f5. Very, very ambitious. Knight takes a4. Okay, now black is, again, at least optically looking very, very promising. He took, yeah, this knight is just cannot, I mean, in a second, knight c3, right? If I go knight c3, I'm attacking the whole world, e4 and b1 and a2. So he took, and again, who wants to play defensively? He played rook h1, and he plays knight takes e7. Now, maybe a little bit ambitious would have been to take immediately, because of course g5, and bishop g5 I think is even worse. So we take with the pawn, queen f3, rook e5, queen h5, sack the exchange, here, here. Again, the question is, why does black need to do that? I think he just doesn't need to do that. Here, black is, I don't think that he is worse. you know, one bit, but don't know if you should have really, if you really have to go for that. So in our game, after this, rook h1, he simply played knight e7. Again, challenging that monster on f5, and you can already see that here the white attack is being deflated, because strategically, black is almost winning. Look at the pawn structure. White has a really unpromising pawn on e4, even less promising here. The rook on b1 is wondering where's the correlation with the rest of the position. Yeah, you have a nice semi-open file, but there's just nothing happening here. You can try to put it in the computer to sacrifice, there's just no success. As a matter of fact, this is what he tried. So, in the game, this is a line. If takes immediately, takes queen f3, bishop g7, bishop takes, knight g6, and the computer says refutation of the attack, winning for black. So in the game again, feeling a bit desperate, after this he played g5, h takes g5, and knight e3. Okay, so the only chance to open the file before, because if he would have played knight e3, then never in his life would he be able to play g5. So he tries to do it this way, but black simply says, okay, on I go with the taking. And the computer, of course, says that black is in great shape. Okay, bishop d2, knight g6, and yeah. Another line that I'm worth mentioning that is starting to double here, 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 here. Looks like, of course, you couldn't take the queen because of the mate, in case that was not noticeable after here. Mate is threatened, but after g6, again, the white position is just completely in shambles. The queen is under attack, bishop d2 is going to be a bit hard to defend. You have to play something like going to the pin with queen e2. Then maybe I can play just like g4 and knight f3 and just game over. Really an amazing game by Svidler. I really love the way he played. So, knight f5, knight e5, queen e2, going back to defend that bishop, only move, g6. Fantastic, just a culmination of success story by black, just a completely winning position. He tried check, here, check, again, desperation. So at first Svidler follows again the Ben Feingold rule of always repeat. He goes back, here, 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 but of course, sooner or later, you've got to take, and there's no reason not to. He tried queen h5, knight g6, and realizing that he has nothing more than a check and a half, Giri had to throw in the towel and acknowledge defeat. Again, in my opinion, a strategically impressive game by Peter Svidler. Really something to be amazed by. I really, really loved it. Now, the lecture is kind of done. We're kind of running out of time. But very quickly, I'm going to show you a game that those of you who are still here, and there's definitely people that are at home, would like to refer to it in the database. This is the game by which I learned how to play the Ruy Lopez, and I think that it's really worth going over at your leisure. This is a game that is between Grandmaster Anatoly Karpov, when he was world champion, against Czech Grandmaster Jan Smejkal. And I'm going to show you the game in real breezy fashion, just so you'll see what to look for when you are looking for it at home. Very recommended. The year is 1977. From the European Championship for men. So, again, we go into this Ruy Lopez. The main line, and the Breyer. Instead of stuff like bishop b7 or knight a5 and all this, he plays into the Breyer. The idea is to reposition the knight flexibly on d7 and play the move c5, which can also be achieved by knight a5, bishop c2, c5. d4, knight bd7, the pawn on e5 needs defense. Knight bd2, bishop b7. Notice that now the knight and the bishop are holding the pawn on e4 hostage. So even though you're really dying to play knight f1, knight g3, you can't. And it's always funny to see in scholastic chess kids just going like knight f1, rook e8, knight g3, not realizing that they can just take a pawn on e4. But of course, white to play properly, he needs to play bishop c2. Again, before, remember, I criticized this move, but now I'm praising it because white really wants to execute his maneuver and somebody needs to watch the kids, right? So he does this. So rook e8, and again, watch how everything falls into place. knight f1, bishop f8, with the threat of e takes d, c takes d, something takes on e4. So the knight comes to g3 just in time. Everything just falls into place. So g6, again, no way that you want to allow at some point knight f5, and also you want to get your bishop to here. That is very normal. g6 is the main move. And white says, okay, for a moment my aspirations on the king side have been curtailed, so let me open a new front on the queen side with a4. It's amazing though, even this game was played like, what, 40 years ago? This is still relevant today. This is still theory, main theory today. And black, of course, answered with his main push here. So d5, again, black is hoping to at some point take once or even twice on d4 and try to get his rook to c8 and try to get his pieces to play on the queen side. So white says, let's block. Notice that these things are almost semi-automatic. When the pawn moves away from c7, then white is willing to push. If the pawn is on c7 and white pushes d5, black can always use his c7 pawn to go only to c6 and strike at the center and dissolve it. So, knight b6. There are other moves in this position. Of course, white's dream in this position is to play b3 and c4. If I manage to get this kind of a pawn chain, e4, d5, c4, b3, that will be fantastic. Something like this happens in this game, and this is already making life very, very difficult for the second player. So normally in this position, I think the most modern line is c4 with the idea of playing knight to c5. And white plays something like bishop g5, and after he's being kicked, bishop to e3, later queen d2 to gain a tempo over that pawn. And this is a very complex game that theory goes many, many moves forward, and very relevant. In our game, we played knight b6, queen e2, tickling the pawn on b5. He took, and took. And you can see that this is already a little bit better for white, because again, he can play b3 and c4, solidifying, and then playing on both wings, playing for the b4 break at the right time, and moving on the king side as well. Okay, I'm not going to show you all the game, because A, we don't have time. Second of all, I really want to make sure that you go to your databases and see it. Karpov, Smejkal, 1977 European Championship. Okay, guys, thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed it. And we are done.